Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, good evening, and good night. This is the Formed by Jesus podcast, season 2. This will be our first recap of episode 1 of Fast. This is getting confusing, but this is season 7, which means fasting, and we love to actually process each message for those who want to learn a bit more. We always have to put stuff on the chopping room floor.
The cutting room floor?
Thank
The
you.
chopping block or
Chopping block.
Yeah.
I was like, I knew this was wrong. I feel like this happens every single episode.
Yeah.
The chopping room floor.
I said Sermon on the Mount in my sermon, and I said
And
it
you
twice.
emphasized
Mount. And one person texted me and he's like, I caught that.
Nice.
Yeah. So we all have our faults.
Weaknesses. That's week 3.
Yeah.
So we'll get to that later. Okay, let's just dive right in.
Yeah.
We're going to, I was out of town. I was in LA and then New York. Just living the
New York life.
New York life.
Got it.
I almost wore my Yankees hat
Yeah.
for this talk or for this chat, but I don't think anybody would actually click. So had a great time, but because of that, we're going to be recording 2 episodes. So let's put a little bit of a time limit on this one. That way we can get to the other one. But I love this first topic. So fasting is abstaining from food for a set period of time. And week number 1 was to say no to cheaper desires. How was that for you, opening up a practice?
It's about time.
That's such a good point.
No.
You usually open up every series.
I know. That's what's ironic that's not intentional, I don't think, unless you're doing it intentional. I don't think
It's
it is.
intentional.
Is it?
No, to me, it's always like, because for now, last year you preached a lot more though. But
Yeah.
I would be like, okay, I put all my energy into this series. I need a week off to like recalibrate.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, you got it, Caleb. So I
Yeah.
can like figure out what's next. Like I need like a mark of like, okay, I'm done with that. I'm ready for the new.
But even when we were at Heart Cry before we did these, I tended to just the way the calendar would line up. I would open the series, which I really enjoy.
But I think you have a gift of like setting that context and like you're such a big overview guy.
Yeah.
Like more than me. Like you're actually more of a visionary than I am, according to that like Patrick Lencioni workshop,
Yeah.
Working Genius. Like you think 30,000 feet. I apparently think like 20,000. I don't know what all that means.
Yeah.
But so yeah.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. I think
Because you addressed a lot.
I know I had to cut some stuff out.
I will say a lot of people told me, can he just do the whole series? So
I think one person said that. I don't think that was a lot of people.
no, there were several.
Okay, well,
And I'm okay with that. Not okay enough to let you do that, but
yeah, it was a lot of fun. I think that the people's experience with fasting is usually, like I said in my story, like we weren't really told why. We're just kind of like, well, this is supposed to make you hurt for people.
was it the 30-hour famine?
I think so.
Yes.
I think it was something like that. Did you do that too?
No, but I was with my dad when he was teaching at one
Okay.
years ago.
Yeah.
It's actually where I met my best friend, Tim Bond. He
Yeah.
was at that. But I got to go to the hotel and eat food.
Yeah.
I was not participating. I was just watching.
Yeah, I think like we got one meal, I think, and I think it was like beans and rice or something, really minimal. But it was a lock-in. Like we were there, and I don't know why. I don't know what we did. We didn't play games. It wasn't a fun lock-in. It was
This
like,
one did.
Yeah, no, we didn't. We watched videos and like prayed.
That's amazing, though.
It was.
Teenagers will lean into that stuff.
I didn't. I was hungry. I was like, I thought this is what I wanted, and it wasn't. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, I think a lot of people's experience with fasting is kind of one of those things where you kind of, it's like, we probably should be doing this, but I don't really know why. And I think it seems somewhat like tangential to the rest of the more obvious practices, which I touched on. I think if we think of discipleship as like a primarily cognitive thing, like information absorption, the more you know, the more mature you are.
Yeah.
And fasting doesn't really make any sense.
I will say too, though, yeah, in our paradigm, it feels opposed to grace.
That too, yeah.
Yeah, which is not. I believe it's a means of grace.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to dive into that a little bit? I guess that's kind of more what I
was going to say. I think that's,
we can reserve that for later.
yeah.
But yeah, that's some of the pushback. But I do love that you kind of built out a theological framework. So you said, to put it bluntly, Christians tend to have such a low view of our bodies along with the rest of the Western world.
Mm-hmm.
Pontificate.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think if spiritual maturity for you is defined by more knowledge and more information and knowing more about God, then fasting doesn't make any sense. Like there's no room or requirement for fasting, because most of us carry this sort of Gnostic, heretical view of our bodies that the rest of the world carries. That idea being our bodies, our flesh. Paul says in Romans 7, who can save me from this body of evil or body of death? The implication we assume is that our bodies are sinful, broken by sin. Because we have all these impulses and these desires, we're basically waiting for Jesus to come back and take us out of our bodies so that we can just live as spirits in heaven, and the world, the physical world, along with our bodies, will be done away with.
Even like Origen, he like castrated himself.
Yeah. A lot of I think like some of the early medieval, even some of the Desert Fathers and Mothers, I think had good intentions, but also a little bit of a warped view of the body.
flesh.
Yeah. Ascetic, like punishing themselves so that they can participate in Christ's sufferings, but also like tame this like evil monster. And so
Do you
fasting.
know that story of the monk that's up on like this really tall pillar and he had a rope, so
rope.
that he didn't die, but the rope was infested with worms and he never took it off?
Yeah. And I think the two extremes are, and this is a paraphrase, like a generalization condensing Scott McKnight's work, where he has, I think, 4 or 5
Which
categories.
is a recommended read.
Yeah. In his book, Fasting. But we tend to view our bodies as either something really like defining and like the end goal, the ultimate, where we'll achieve happiness or whatever if we can satisfy our bodies, or the opposite, which is like we need to train it, beat it into submission, and then like just kind of sit tight until Jesus comes back and saves us. And I think there's some truth to that, in that we do need to restrain our flesh. That's the whole message is about. But the one thing I didn't get to talk much about was the rhythm of fasting and feasting. So
Yeah.
feasting, like our
I guess
bodies.
I touched on that a little, but I'd love for you to go even further.
Yeah, like there's a huge, and I was trying to get at this when I said God, in the beginning, creation is good. God creates a physical world and he calls it very good. He looks at all that he has made and he calls it very good. And so the way that we use our bodies to enjoy good food and feasting and physical pleasures within the right parameters is supposed to be also a means of grace, a means that redirects us and orients us back towards God and all of it. It's like a way to worship God with our bodies, and that we don't beat it into submission, but that we use it to enjoy life fully. But
Which is why I love the context of hospitality. Like we've talked about feasting before.
Yeah. In order to do that, though, we live an imbalanced life, in that we are always in a state of feasting, never in a state of fasting or restraining. And
Which
so,
even physically is not good for you.
Yeah, exactly. So, you get all these obesity statistics and things like that.
That's why I thought that J.W. Richards' Eat, Fast, Feast book was really helpful to talk about that rhythm. And I know for me, even what's incredible, even like my ability to sermon prep is so much better when I have that rhythm of fasting, normal eating, and then feasting. And even like Mark at church was telling me, he's like, he's doing a full Wednesday, like full. So he said he couldn't wait this first time on a Thursday to like have like the best food. But he's just like, I just felt terrible after. So really, especially after prolonged fast, you don't feast right away. There has to be this building up into it, because like it's just not good for your stomach. Has already even shrank.
So what? So does he
Shopping room
eats
for
Tuesday night and then Thursday morning?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. It's
which
weird.
is a pretty severe. Like that's
substantial. Yeah.
yeah.
I do Tuesday night to Wednesday night, and then Thursday night to Friday night. But I think my tendency has been that on Fridays, especially right before Sabbath, if I just indulge in like all this stuff, I feel awful after. And
Right.
It's a weird. So yeah.
I actually heard when I was in New York, we went to the church that Tim Keller started, and the sermon was on the body, and he was talking about how one source of frustration for people in society because you're saying, like these two altering views, like either like it's God or like you punish it. What's hard is culture says both at the same time.
Yeah.
And so there's such a dissonance. There's such a depression and dysfunction because we're kind of told to do both, and that's impossible, So that's even fascinating, how we look at that. It's just our worldview is not consistent.
Yeah. Yeah. Even though like you take somebody who's obsessed with like aesthetic beauty and exercise, and that I think the means is restrain your body, because left to its own devices, it'll be evil. But the end goal is still one of like, I'm restraining my body so that it can look good and feel good, and I can worship it, and that can be and I think, it is a really delicate balance in that we, as Christians, honor God with our bodies. I think that's the missing element, is instead of using our bodies for indulgence or for some like masochistic pleasure, the end goal of our bodies is to offer them to God in order to be holy and set apart, and to
Well, and Romans language, our bodies are instruments, either that of righteousness or lawlessness, instruments of sin. So our bodies can be such a beautiful thing. And like you said, you don't have a body, you are a body. So what are you using it for as an instrument for righteousness or not? Like most of our guilt stems from whatever we did with our bodies, so like we have to apply so much grace. Like we have to apply the work of Christ to our literal bodies, not just to our minds.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'll read a quick overview of your message. I'm just waiting. This was your message, so you're supposed to navigate this.
To run it, yeah.
Here was the overview. As we begin our fasting practice, we must first come to terms with the reality that most of us have a low view of our bodies and how they relate to our spirituality. Like the rest of the Western world, followers of Jesus tend to either worship their bodies or treat them like an evil. Sorry, I just thought it was a typo. Treat them like an evil with desires that need to be controlled. And there's some truth to this. Our bodies are both broken and redeemed, but rather than worship our bodies, punish them, or ignore them, the way of Jesus offers an alternative. To help us reconnect our spirituality to our bodies and to help us learn to say no to our cheap desires, we practice fasting. I also touched this a little bit on Sunday, and that's what I think is helpful when we do this on the practice series. Like, just because we addressed cheap desires in week 1 doesn't mean we won't talk about it in 2, 3, and 4. Because to me, it's just been so life-giving. Like something that's like I have struggled with using food as a source of comfort.
Yeah.
And so it's been very helpful to have a inbuilt rhythm to say no to that. But what I recognize is another thing I have, and I think it's general in all men-ish, is like, anger and like frustration. I think I'm more comfortable with the word frustration than anger.
Call it what it is.
And exactly. I think this is me trying to make myself feel better about my life. But it's amazing, especially when I do like the 40-day fasts. And let's be clear, I've never actually done a 40-day only water. When I say 40 days, it's like I just have dinner every night. So I need to step up.
I've never done a 40-day fast. I've never done only food or only dinner.
Oh, okay.
I think the longest one I've done is 21 days.
I did that leading up to our decision for the 2 services. But with that, I didn't get angry as much. Like it's so strange. It's just like you've opened up yourself to the Spirit of God to have control over your flesh, and it just empowers you to say no, not only to food, but to other things like frustration, anger, gossip. I don't know. For me, there's an experience where I lose interest in even engaging in those things.
So I'm curious about that process, because every time I fast, this happens to me. Yeah. So what was that like for you? Because I think the moments where so you're saying that in those 40 days, you didn't get angry as much? Totally. Okay. So I'm
not saying I was perfect and floating on water.
Yeah.
But even Jordan would be like, usually that would make you mad.
Yeah.
That's like even little things like traffic. Like it was just like, it's so weird. And I think it's going to touch into what we're going to look at in week 3. But there's this sense of weakness where you're like, I don't have time to engage in that. Like I don't have the energy to be upset about that.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
So that's not your experience?
No. I think what happens to me is I was talking to my group about this on Wednesday too. Fridays are usually the days that I fast.
You're
consistently.
not like the hypocrites.
Yeah, not like the hypocrites. I do Wednesdays and Fridays. Also, I've never heard it pronounced
Didache.
Yeah.
I know. I did get feedback from that.
I don't know what it. I've
To
always
be fair,
said
I've
Didache.
only read. I've never heard somebody talk about the Didache.
Didache. Yeah.
So I just look at it and think Didache. So yeah, one guy was like, "So last week, Pastor Caleb said Didache. You said Didache." I said the only thing I will die on is that it's Caesarea, not Caesarea.
No.
But he's probably right on the Didache.
No, I think in Greek it's kappa for Caesarea. So
Kappa for lies. All caps.
no,
All
that's
cap.
CAP cap. Kappa is a K
Yeah,
in English transliteration. Okay.
Everything's fine. Keep going.
Anyways,
It's
no,
Caesarea.
my experience is Fridays, for example, are the days that I usually I watch the kids all day. So we don't have any sitters or anything that day. So I'm with them. And usually between 2 and 4,
And conveniently, that's my Sabbath day. So I don't
Yeah.
see you.
usually between 2 and 4, that's the worst. Like the rest of the day, I'm fine. I don't have hunger pangs or anything, but around 2 and 4,
I just
somewhere,
hate 2 and 4 in general.
yeah, in that window, I think that's what it is. The devil
Acedia.
does something to me. So I think like making my kids food, that's a really helpful part of fasting. Is I think fasting, like if you can do it on a day where you're less busy,
Yeah.
because it's easy to fast when you're like, some days Shelby will be so busy at work, she's like, I forgot to eat.
Like I fast Sunday mornings all the way, and we have like a late lunch at 2. It's
Yeah.
the easiest thing ever because I'm so busy.
Exactly. Yeah.
So is that really? I do think there's still an element there.
Yeah.
Where like because I'm waging war, but
Yeah.
those are easier.
Yeah, so Fridays I'm home usually all day. I'm with the kids. I'll work a little bit. Like I do the guides and
Yeah.
touch up stuff for Sundays just at my computer at home. But that because I'm home all day, between 2 and 4 is when everything starts to come up. And I think what usually my experience is I find myself, I don't have to think about like, oh, I don't have energy to be angry. It comes out. So because I'm not eating, because I'm hangry, my impatience with my kids is higher. I'm more impulsive and reactive to frustration and to anger. I get angrier. But because I'm fasting, what happens then is I'm aware of that. So normally I think what would happen is those impulses would come up and I wouldn't recognize it because it's my normal rhythm. I'm eating, whatever. But on the days where I'm fasting, my mind is constantly thinking about like, okay, I'm doing this to offer myself fully to God. I just reacted I
more aware.
snapped at Eden and she's 2 or she's 3. Like why did I do that? So then what happens is because I'm fasting, I become aware of that. And then I like open that part of myself up to God for healing.
Yes.
Because I wouldn't have been aware of that had I not been fasting.
Yeah.
So
I think that's actually more my experience when I just do the 1 day fast.
Yeah.
I think over the 40 something happens.
Mm-hmm.
Like 10 days in, you just like,
Yeah.
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 So I totally can relate to that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, or it's like really guilt. Like it makes you guilty. You're like, this is the day I'm dedicating to the Lord. I'm saying no to food, and I'm such a jerk.
Yeah.
Like, I would be happier and nicer if I ate food right now.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of people's pushback. We've gotten that feedback before. Is like, well, I can't.
We
I'm
have this
nicer.
week.
And I'd say that's kind of the point, is to make yourself aware of who you actually are. I think that part of you is what Paul would call the flesh.
Yeah.
What psychologists would call the ego is what I'm learning.
Spoiled child.
Yeah. Yeah. The part of you that lashes out when it doesn't get what it wants is what we're trying to offer to God, not beat it to death, because we can't. Paul says in Romans 7, who's going to save me from this wretched man? I can't beat that part of me. I don't have the willpower to do it, but I can in fasting offer that up to God and say, Jesus, will you save me from this?
And we haven't said it. Maybe I'll say it on week 3, but fasting is not removal to get approval. It's making space for God's grace, right? It is inviting yourself up to the Spirit's work.
Which is the means of grace. Like that's the, yeah.
And, Willard's famous line is, grace is not opposed to effort. It is opposed to earning. I think you can also say, well, first of all, fasting is a means of grace, but you can say fasting is not opposed to effort. It takes a lot of effort, but it is opposed to earning. We are not, and this was week 2, we are not earning God's favor. We are not saying we are now more precious to God. Fasting is about making God more precious to us. But that's dipping into week 2. I don't know how long we've been going, but what other, we're good. We got 10 more minutes.
Yeah.
What are some other thoughts?
Yeah. I think the other thing I didn't get to touch on too much was I really wanted to expand more on the internal desire, external expression part, because I think that there's people, if your approach to God and your approach to your relationship with God is only cognitive as well, again, pointing to this assumption that spiritual maturity has more to do about how much you know versus who you are, your embodied spirituality. If the way that you relate to God is mostly cognitive, then I think you hit a limit at some point. And this gets into a little bit of week 2, but this idea of like in Psalm 63 or Psalm 119 verses 33 through 40, which was my kind of anchoring text, David is like, it's a psalm of desire where he's communicating and expressing his desire for the law of the Lord, which is really interesting because Psalm 119 is all about the law and David's love for the law, which is weird because if you've ever read the law, it's not the most like
stirring.
Yeah. Like don't boil a baby goat in his mother's milk or something. It's like, I wasn't planning on it. Like, but I think David sees the end goal of like the law reveals God's communion, his desire to be in communion with his people. And so that internal desire that David has can't be reached with just wanting it and just wanting to know more about it and learning more. He has to say, turn my eyes away from worthless things. So there's like a changing of his, like, and of course it's a poem, but there's still, he's using like a physical, like a change of his physical posture from one thing, away from one thing and towards God. And I think that essentially at its core is what fasting is. First and foremost is changing not just your mind and what you think, but your whole body's posture towards God as a way to express the internal desire.
Yeah, and we use that phrase cheaper desire intentionally because God has gifted us with the desires, but our flesh wants to just settle for the cheap version of it, but there's a deeper version. So fasting enables us to say no to that cheap version, but it's not saying no to desire. It's actually saying yes to the deepest desires he's created us for. And so that's what I really love about the practice of fasting. I guess the other thing, and I think I mentioned it in one of the services on Sunday, but I do think there's a misconception, and I don't know if you want to speak on this some more. There's a misconception that fasting is for like the really mature, but the Didache is kind of like, hey, step 1, start fasting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is interesting. Again, in some ways, I think the first century church, the early church, was more aware of their physical rootedness to their bodies, their connection to their bodies than we were. But that the view that we have today of that separation between body and soul existed. I mean, First John is all about Jesus being an embodied, person. There were also, one of the earliest heresies was this idea that like your body doesn't matter and there is a separation between soul and body and things like that. So it's not all that different from our culture, but I think they did have, because they were aware of that, they knew that they needed to fight against that. And so fasting was just kind of a normal, like of course I would give my body to God because I've chosen to follow Jesus. And I know that there's a spiritual element to my body. And I know what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians, what I do with my body is really important. And I can't, join it to unholiness. I need to join it to God. So yeah.
It probably also helps that there was in that time food sacrificed to idols. So people already knew the religious undertones of food in general in ways that we're so separated from.
Food wasn't a commodity. I think we're used to commodity and convenience. All of our impulses, I think I said this, can be met with just a drive away. Like you could have food delivered to your door now. You don't even have to go anywhere.
Right.
Which would have been an unheard of in Jesus' day. So just our mere access to indulgence, I think has put us in a weird place where we see them as blessings, and they are. I mean, it's great. DoorDash is an amazing gift, but what that does to our souls is really interesting. And I think the early church would have been astounded to see how much we've worshipped our bodies. I don't know.
All right. Thank you for tuning in with us. Comment what phrase?
Didache.
That's how you say it?
I said Didache or Didache. I don't know.
Oh, I never heard the Dida one. So Didache.
It's all wrong. I don't know.
Or how do they comment that? what's your vote? Didache or Didache?
Spell out what you think it is. Yeah, phonetically, I guess.
That's probably too much work. They're never
Yeah,
gonna do it.
yeah.
Comment Trey's version or Caleb's version.
Didache or Didache or Didache.
Yes, I feel like Didache sounds like Italian or something, but
Didache, yeah.
Didache. All right, see you guys on the next one.